in a high stakes deal, who actually says yes? Is it the CEO? Is it the managing partner? Maybe there's a director of operations. Is it legal? The truth is, it's all of them in different ways. Let's talk about it on the podcast today.
You're listening to Breaking BizDev with John Tyreman and Mark Wainwright. Conversations that break down, beat up, and redefine business development for the professional services firms of tomorrow. And now for your hosts, John and Mark.
Welcome, everyone, to another episode of Breaking BizDev. I'm Mark. He's John. We are here today to talk about the buyer. John, what are your thoughts on that?
The buyer or the buyers?
Oh, good one. Good edit there. Yeah, right. It's, I think a lot of people maybe I talk to deal with the buyer as sort of this single thing, right? This amalgamated sort of entity.
Monolith entity.
Yeah, we're the seller, they're the buyer. But as it turns out, the buyer can be a multi-headed beast.
Oh gosh, it's like the Hydra, right? From like Hercules.
There you go. Yeah. And, when you look at more contemporary sort of sales content out there, there's an increasing sort of focus on the buyers, multiple buyers, because, again and again, we kind of run into the fact that we're selling to multiple people. Even you and I, John, in our little practices, each on our own, we run into multiple people through the course of selling our services. So yeah, I think this is a good episode and it's relevant.
This was a fun thought exercise to go through like these different buyer roles and then like thinking through my client accounts, like who is in what position and kind of mind mapping that all. So that was a really fun exercise. I'm really excited to break it down today. So today we're going to break down those different buyer roles. We're going to talk about, why selling professional services isn't simple. And there's really three primary roles that we identified. So we'll walk through each one of those, give a few examples, and then we're going to choreograph a complex sale at the end.
I like that one. Yeah, that's a good one. So yeah, and you had a little reminder here. I'm terrible at this, John. I will remind everyone, feel free to subscribe to our podcast, leave a rating, leave a review, all that stuff. I know that, you love to hit on that. So I'll just go ahead and throw that out there. So yeah, if you've joined us, thank you for joining us. Thank you for continuing to support and listen to Breaking BizDev. And here we go. Let's talk about the buyers.
Yeah, let's talk about the buyers, but let's set the table first a little bit. Selling
Fantastic.
Professional services isn't simple. We're not selling a $500 product, right? We're selling a complex, multifaceted service offering. There's phases, there's timelines, there's human resources and capital. A lot of times there's intangible outcomes that are associated with these projects. And so selling a professional services is really built on trust. And it's built on relationships. And as a buyer, you're going into an engagement thinking through it from different lenses. There's multiple people that come together and they evaluate different vendors. So this isn't a transaction, one-to-one. There are multiple voices involved in this sale.
Right. Good point. And the first kind of bullet point you touched on there, the long sales cycle. Yeah, that's a reality. Some of these things take a long time to develop and then ultimately come together and contract. And you could be touching on many different people throughout that whole sort of buying, selling journey. And just the fact that these sales cycles are really long, not just talking about our stuff, but we're talking about professional services, right? In general, is that, you can transition your way from, a champion inside to someone else to someone else to someone else. And, maybe you stumble across legal at some point. So yeah, you're selling to multiple people, and we're going to talk about that.
Cool. So let's take a look at the three different buyer roles. And we're going to talk about each one of them, who they are, what they care about, how to earn their trust, different tips for dealing with these three different buyers. And as we were walking through this, Mark, this was a concept that was kind of first introduced to me when I was going through some sales training, probably like 5 or 6 years ago. And I thought, well, it would be good to kind of map these to. Are you familiar with the Entrepreneurial Operating System, EOS?
Sure, absolutely. Yeah, I have clients who use it.
There's terms that they use, and I think that might be helpful to kind of navigate the conversation because that's pretty popular. There's the visionary, who is the CEO. This is the president, the managing partner. This is usually one person within the organization. There may be multiple people who wear visionary hats, different partners at different times, but typically this is one person.
Yeah.
And this visionary, they're really focused on the firm as a whole. What's best for the firm? What's best for the organization? They're driven by, again, a vision for what they want the firm to become, what outcomes they want to achieve. And they're looking for alignment internally around what those strategic goals and objectives are. So that's how they're working internally with their cohorts.
Yeah, makes sense. I can picture buyers that I've come across and people I know that have this role. Absolutely. So yeah, the visionary. Yeah. And how do we win over the visionary? That's the big question.
That is the big question. You want to tackle that one, Mark?
Well, yeah, it's we have to stay focused on outcomes, like the ultimate client results, what they really want to achieve. We can't get tripped up in the details, the nitty-gritty, the deliverables, all that stuff, right? We need to make sure that we are looking at what they're looking at, which are these ultimate, big, hairy, audacious goals.
BHAGs.
Yeah, BHAGs, or here's what we're trying to accomplish in the next 3 months or 6 months or whatever else it is in certain initiatives or things that they're particularly focused on. So the visionary is someone that you need to appreciate their long-term vision and help kind of support that, and align with it. So yeah, that's I think how we align with that. And I think it's worth saying before we get too far down the road on this is that I think there's a lot of people out there either that I've worked with that listen to this podcast or whatever else that are working in professional services who really can't even get their head wrapped around the fact that there's actually multiple buyers of multiple personalities and all that stuff. And there absolutely are, whether or not the client organization is bringing that to you internally, there are different buyers inside of your client's organizations. It could be public sector, it could be private sector, it could be anything. So I think this whole thing broadly applies, and the visionary is a big one because that's a critical person to, bring over to your side of things. Super important.
Yeah, they're the ones that are steering the ship. They're not necessarily the ones that are inspecting the engine room.
Oh, there you go.
So we got that little analogy there.
All right, nice, good. I like that one.
So let's move on to some of these other buying roles, and then I think what we can do, Mark, is we can kind of open it up to a conversation about how each of these roles kind of like interplays with each other, because that's an important part of this.
Yeah, makes sense. All right, we got visionary first. The second one you have here, John, is the operator.
The operator, yes, another EOS term, but these are the folks that are in tune with the details. These are the folks that are going to take the service that you're offering and interface with the organization.
Yeah.
These are the VPs, the department heads, managers. One quick note about this buying role: this can be multiple people. There's not necessarily one operator that you may be dealing with. There may be multiple department heads that you're coordinating with.
Yeah, agreed.
So it's important to understand who those folks are within the organization you're selling into.
Right.
A little bit like where they're coming from is they're career driven, right? They want to make sure that this purchase decision reflects well on them. And they're going to be judged on the outcome of this engagement by the visionary.
Right. This is that's an important differentiation where when we spoke of the visionary previously, kind of looking at sort of organizational results, organizational performance, this big idea that they're kind of chasing after, there's a shift here, and the operator starts looking at themselves and their role in organizational success or failure.
Right.
Yeah.
And so it's something that's really important to keep in mind, not only during the sale, but also throughout the engagement.
Yeah.
is, are we supporting this operator within their organization? Are we helping them look good to that visionary?
Yeah. Yeah. And I think the operator can be an advocate or a supporter of yours in the organization. You come alongside and, they're really excited about this whole thing, or they can be a detractor, right? They can be someone
true.
who's like, all right, I need you to prove this, my neck's on the line here, pal. So let's see what you got. So absolutely. So we've got some ideas, some tactics on how to win them over.
Yeah, how are we going to win these folks over, Mark?
Yeah. Yeah. So they are process and detail oriented. So yeah, they want to see sort of behind the curtain, right? They want to see, your ABC 1, 2, 3. They want to see the flow charts and all of that stuff. They want to see the outlines and the content. They want to know how they can take you, particularly if it's a supporter or an advocate. They want to know how they can take you, your stuff, your ideas, and sell within the organization. Sell upwards, sell sideways, building support, get people on board. So they need those tools. They need that information to help you sell into the organization, because obviously they've seen you. You're a professional services provider. You're going to help them achieve what they want to achieve. You're going to help this person look really good. They want to advance your ideas in the organization.
I'm reminded of a concept that we talked about earlier, and it was like those 5 steps to mastery.
Yep.
And it's like you need to educate these operators within your target organization to the point where they can start to teach others within the organization.
Yeah. Good. So yeah, the tactics there are pretty straightforward. You have to, keep that person in the spotlight. You have to make sure that you're tending to their needs throughout the whole buying and selling process, and you need to make them look good. You need to make them know like they know what's going on here.
And I suppose that for folks that are in a doer seller seat, that would be kind of inherent throughout the process because they were involved in bringing in that new business. But I can see how that would be a challenge if there's a firm with an organization that's more sales led and has primary business development people.
Yeah.
So that transfer of knowledge is important between sales and, the delivery team.
Right.
And then understanding what makes these operators tick and how that delivery team can kind of look for those signals in the engagement.
Yeah, this is if you are the consultant selling into an organization, you're right. There needs to be a lot of coordination, particularly if there's multiple people involved on your side. If there's a sales or a business development team, and then there's a delivery team. We talk a lot about the doer seller who does both, but in an organization of any size, they might have different people. So orchestrating and choreographing the complex sale is really important. And that involves, on your side, making sure that everybody is aligned and up to speed, and who's who, what operators are supporters, what operators are detractors, which people you need to leverage to advance you and your cause inside the buying organization. So yeah, that's the operator is good. The operator can be a number of different things, but definitely focus on the details. That visionary that we talked about first, the big idea. They're focused on big results. So we've got one more here, John.
Yeah.
And you have it as the risk mitigator, but I prefer the term you have here, wet blanket.
Wet blanket. Yeah.
The wet blanket. Yeah.
All right. So this is when we start to get into the folks who push numbers around and get into the contract. So this is CFOs. These are accounting folks, controllers, legal teams. There's usually one person who's brought in. It could be multiple people in these deals, depending on how large the organization is. Think about these folks as like a gatekeeper.
Yeah, right.
They can't necessarily say yes to a deal, but they can absolutely say no. We don't have the funds. This puts us in an adverse legal scenario. It puts us at risk. So that's really kind of the mindset to think of with these folks. Like we said, the risk mitigator, they want to manage risk. They want to mitigate that as much as possible. That's their job.
John, we love these folks. Come on, really. I mean, we're like the wet blanket is a derogatory term. We love these folks. You've dealt with people in the accounting industry for years, legal, whatever else, and they're good people, right? But sometimes the role that they play in this whole buying, selling process can be a little tricky. So we've got some ideas on how to win this win this group over. And, when you and I talk this through, I think first and foremost, the way to win these folks over is just have conversations, right? A lot of times you'll find that these individuals, these buyers, are trying to hide behind the spreadsheets and the contracts and the documents, and there's emails going back and forth, and no one's getting on a live synchronous call to kind of talk things through. I mean, I've had contracts, agreements that I've sent over, and I get them back, and it doesn't look like any document that I ever created because legal had their way, right? So that first one, and there's others, but the first one is head and shoulders above kind of all the rest of them. It's just gotta talk.
Well, it's, they're people too, right? They deal with accounting spreadsheets and, legal terms and contracts, but at the end of the day, they just want to be heard, right?
Yeah.
They want to feel seen. They just want to make their presence known in the buying process, that they have a role to play. And so, like you said, just talking to them, having synchronous conversations, acknowledging that they're there and that you're thinking about them.
Yeah.
That goes a long way.
You're listening to Breaking BizDev,
the podcast that beats up, breaks down, and redefines business development for the professional services firms of tomorrow. Your hosts are John Tyreman, founder of Red Cedar Marketing, the podcast marketing company for experts and professional services firms,
and Mark Wainwright, principal consultant and founder of Wainwright Insight, the fractional sales manager and sales consultant to professional services firms.
If you find this podcast helpful, please help us by following the show and leaving a review on Apple Podcasts.
And now, back to the show. It does. And, in my history of, to go back what you said initially is that, they're not the ones that are going to convince the organization to hire you as a consulting firm, but they are definitely ones who can, blackball you and, close the door. And I have had that experience both working with kind of in the consulting world and also kind of on my own. On both sides of it, I've had, to run into legal, and it was like a buzzsaw, and it was crazy, and it killed a reasonably good sized deal in a firm I was working with. On my end of things, I have had sort of some little tug of war going on, even, in legal, and lo and behold, having conversations helps resolve a whole bunch of that. So a couple of the other tactics we kind of listed here on how to navigate the risk mitigators, being upfront, honest, transparent with, stuff that's in your contracts and in your agreement, meaning take the opportunity to walk it through, walk through the different boring legalese clauses, particularly the ones that can be sort of, tricky ones. Walk through the dollars and cents and the timing and sort of all that stuff. Bring up potential issues or just areas of concern or areas of just conversation. Bring that up, proactively. Bring that up ahead of time, so nobody feels like you're trying to slip something past them. Right? There's no small print. And do everything you can to make their lives and their job easier, right? Lower the friction. We don't want this to stall. You are here talking to their legal team, and these last few steps, or whoever it is, their inside or outside counsel, whoever they are, you started this whole thing talking to their big visionary who wants to achieve this big goal. And the two of you, by working together and working through whatever details you need to suss out, is going to help that visionary achieve what they want to achieve. So
look at you tying an outcome to an internal conversation.
Yeah. I have, truth be told, and maybe this starts us wandering into the stories, but I've been faced with that situation where it was kind of like I was continuing to get, pushback on legal, and I had to kind of push the visionary button. I had to say, okay, all right, we need to bring the CEO back into this conversation, and that was not fun. It's tricky, but we needed to, and lo and behold, everything worked out fine. But yeah, at some point, you kind of have to.
Do you have any other examples?
Well, yeah, I mean, I got a lot of these. Yes, I have engaged with, I don't know, how do you want to, before I start wandering off aimlessly here, let's let's
let's
use
wrap
some
this section
examples.
up. So
Yeah.
we talked
Yeah.
about 3 different buying roles.
Yeah.
There's the visionary, that CEO, they're thinking about the firm. The operator, they're thinking about the details, they're thinking about their own career. There's the risk mitigator or the wet blankets. They're thinking about the dollars and the cents and de-risking the engagement. So those are the 3 different buying roles. And there can be multiple operators. That's typically the one where there is multiple roles. The other 2, there's really only one. So that's kind of like we're putting the pieces on the board.
Yeah.
And yeah, let's share some stories about how maybe you and I have kind of like run into different challenges with those folks, or successfully navigated some of those scenarios.
Yeah. Yeah. The ones that are top of mind for me, and maybe for a good number of organizations out there, and specifically I'm talking to a lot of the small businesses out there in the world, because as we know, John, the vast majority of all professional services firms are small businesses.
It's like 80%.
And that's defined a little bit differently from industry to industry, but like you said, 80 some percent, 90% of consulting firms out there in any industry are small. So I work with a lot of small firms. So that has meant a lot of times that I'm very early on, if not immediately, talking to the visionary. I'm talking to the person that was scratching their head. They have a problem, they have a need, they go looking, or maybe they've caught wind of the work that I do in some way. Maybe they've heard of me from someone. So fortunately, I have found that most of the time I am talking to that person early on. Other consulting firms and professional services firms cannot say the same thing, but a lot of times I've had that experience. And it is selling and having that sort of buying, selling relationship with the visionary is good, because, and that's kind of like shockingly obvious, right? It's good because that tends to move a little bit faster, right? There's a little more urgency. There's a greater desire to get started, because if we start now, that means that we will be able to achieve the results we want to achieve sooner. Yeah. So that's the good thing. One of the tricky things I would say with that situation, and this is, I could probably apply this to some personal situations, is that because of the slightly faster sales process, and because the visionary typically comes into the conversation with at least a somewhat defined picture of the future, this picture of success, whatever, you have to be really certain that you are, or at least can be, aligned to that picture of the future quickly. Because if the visionary's coming into the conversation, they have certain expectations, and the sale is moving along quickly, and you don't actually get to the point where those expectations are completely aligned, then fast forward, you can find yourself in a little bit of a problem, because you're trying to look at the results you achieve, and it's like, oh, this isn't what I pictured. And it's like, well, we actually really didn't successfully flesh out everything you wanted to achieve, and you didn't share with me quite completely that vision, that picture of success you had in your head. So I will say that, from personal experience, I think
that's such an important point. And I didn't even think about that in coming into this. I'm glad you brought that up, Mark, because I've had my own experiences where I've done that as well, because I sell to a lot of small businesses as well.
Yeah.
And that's so there is like this notion of like pausing and like aligning yourself with that vision. And I think that is an important exercise to go through, especially when you're dealing with smaller firms.
Yeah.
Good point.
No doubt. And I have I have good examples, and we don't want to, these are real examples, as we're not trying to be hypothetical here. I have very real examples when a champion has successfully or has not successfully brought me into an organization. A lot of times the champion will bring you in. They are well regarded, well respected. They very quickly understand that this whole buying, selling thing has to happen with other people, that they need to build support. You provide them the information and the content they need to build support. They successfully build support, and then you're kind of off and running. The other champion, which at the outset looks identical, right? They look the same, but they are a champion who wants to do this thing on their own, right? They found this little gem out there that's you're the consultant, you're the consultant firm, whatever else. And, whether you're an architect or an accountant or whatever else, whatever you are out there, there's someone in the middle of the organization who latched a hold of you and thinks, oh my gosh, they would be fantastic to work with. But they don't realize sort of the decision-making politics and complexity inside their own organization.
Right.
So they start dealing with you in this little sort of secret one-on-one fashion. So, and that's hard because that person isn't trying to advance the idea internally in their organization as much as they are trying to advance themselves. So what you end up doing is you end up working with that person through the beginning of a buying, selling process, and you're basically just consulting to them. I mean, I've had that happen to me in the past, and you've probably had that too. People who love the idea of you don't understand what's needed in order to actually get you into the organization, so they just start pumping you for information. And I have experienced that.
Yep. I've experienced that too. And just a caveat, something to just point out. So this, I'm assuming this is someone in that operator seat that is a champion and needs to bring in a visionary. Maybe they need to bring in some other operators and that risk mitigator into the conversation, but they're not doing that.
There's two things. They probably don't see the complexity that's required in this sale. They don't want to bring in other people, and that they want to be the hero.
Yeah. Survival mindset.
Yeah. And I will say, right, it's worth kind of a pause on that thing, is that this is where having an organized, clear selling process where you are qualifying the prospective client, this is where this is so critical, because part of qualification, again and again, I talk to people, it's like qualification is one of the very first thing that you do when you're trying to determine fit, right? And when we are qualifying organizations, we're qualifying the people.
Yes.
And we're qualifying the work to be done, right? So both those things have to be, thumbs up, right? We can't just be, a lot of times I talk to firms and they're just qualifying the work. They're saying, oh yeah, our expertise is great. We can do that work, no problem. But they fail to qualify the people. So you will look past someone like this. You will look past a buyer who is an operator who wants you to be their, little friend that sits on their shoulder, or they have you in their back pocket, and they're just using you as sort of reference material rather than actually creating an opportunity for you to engage with their organization at scale.
Yeah, well, I think we're starting to kind of wander into how our listeners can apply this to their own sales process. So you're absolutely right, Mark. It's important to first have a process in place and structure in place. I suppose that part of that is just first identifying who sits in those seats, right? Mapping the org chart.
Yeah. And understanding the specific situation that you're in. Are we at the beginning of this whole thing? Are these some of the initial conversations? And like I said, the initial conversations, we're trying to suss out whether there's a fit there, or whether we're going to qualify these folks. So it's that situational awareness, not just who these folks are, but also where you are in this whole buying process. So that's critical. That term of situational awareness in the buying, selling process is critical. We need to know that we're at the beginning, we're in the middle, we're towards the end. Towards the end, we're dealing with different people possibly. So we're understanding and recognizing where we are situationally. Yeah.
What are some of the signals that you look for to identify that?
The how easily they are, and this goes back to some qualification stuff, is that, how sharing and forthcoming they are with information. I have actually found that visionaries tend to be very forthcoming and sharing with information.
Me too.
So you're asking good initial qualification questions and you're getting excellent responses, not just because they're willing to give you those responses, but also they have that information. They've got, I've got my strategic plan one pager sitting right in front of me. I'll send it to you, right? Like that kind of a thing, as opposed to And this is, as we walk towards the other extreme, right? The operator is probably a little bit less forthcoming with information. And then when we move to sort of the wet blanket end of things, forget it. If their cards are held very close to their chest, they are not going to share anything. So I would say situationally, that's one indicator of frankly who you're talking to, is that I think these visionaries tend to be very forthcoming with information, and they immediately, start talking about the big picture. This is fundamentally what's going on in the organization. This is really where we want to be in a year or two or whatever that is. So, all right, some other things that we need to be aware of is, like you said, mapping the organization. You said we kind of need to know who's there, and we need to sort of on our end of things understand when we're going to be engaging with those people. Like you said, start building trust.
Yeah.
Start having conversations, either synchronous or asynchronous communications and conversations with those folks. And then obviously when it becomes time for you to be dealing with them more intensely, i.e. legal towards the end of this whole thing, is that you have a relationship, you're willing to be conversational about it, you're both human beings, all that other stuff. So being aware of the organization and then understanding that each one of those people is going to come to play is like, oh, I wonder why the manager that you were talking to, or the CEO or the managing partner, whoever else, who's this new person they copied in? It's like, oh, that's legal. Yeah. Oh, there's legal. Yeah. High legal. And then there's, accounting. And it's like, eventually you're going to, as an outside consultant, eventually you're going to need to develop a relationship with accounting.
Yep.
Because they have to figure out the whole invoicing thing, right? You send them a bill, they should pay you within a certain amount of time and make sure that all works. And, I've had very good, healthy conversations with those accounting folks that says, look, we have specific terms in our contract as far as how, invoicing and getting paid and all that other stuff. I want to make sure that what I'm doing fits in really well with what you're doing in your accounting team, right? If you're the vendors, consultants that you work with, if you pay them once a month, great. If you pay them multiple times a month, great, whatever. I tend to be fairly aggressive on my terms initially. And then some firms just say, look, we need to pay you when we pay people, because we pay a lot of different people and you need to fit into that. And I said, great. Okay, let's make it work. So that's a huge win. So situational awareness, understanding that you're eventually going to be dealing with multiple people across the organization, building trust all the way, being very open and honest. These are all things that fit in under that sort of choreography thing of how we can help lead a really good sales process.
Yeah, I think another way that this might be more of like on the fore end of our marketing and sales continuum that is sales led but marketing supported is equipping those operators, those internal champions, with the information, with the tools that they need to have those conversations internally. And this could be like, hey, you know what, Bob the consultant gave us this case study, and here's a case example, or he actually hosts a podcast, and here's that conversation if you wanted to listen to it, and here's he talks about that specific topic. And so arming those champions, arming those tactical buyers with that information is really important.
And this is where those client success stories come in, where you can relay on a 60-second story of success of one of the clients that you've worked with, and they can take that story, your champion can take that story and go tell it to others, right? We've talked about the importance of storytelling in the past. Mm-hmm. This is a fantastic moment to bring that up, because stories are memorable and they're repeatable, and the people that you're talking to can take that story and run with it. Because some people aren't going to want to listen to, a 30-minute podcast, or aren't going to want to look at a 3-page case study. They're going to want a quick little thing, and that's a fantastic tool to use. So,
saying the same message and conveying the same stories, but in various lengths and formats.
Yeah. All right, I think we're just about there. Let's tie this up in a nice little bow.
Yeah. So I think to bring it all the way back, those 3 different buying roles: the visionary, the operator, and the risk mitigators. That's really the one big takeaway that I think our listeners can take away from this is who within the accounts that you're dealing with, your client accounts, your prospective clients, map those individuals, and how do they roll up, and what seats do they play, and what roles do they play. I think you'll find that you'll uncover new things you haven't thought about when you go through that exercise.
Yeah. Excellent point. You have written here the 3 sort of, I look at these and I'm thinking, this is ideally what we want these different buyers to be thinking and feeling, and maybe even saying, is that the strategic visionary buyer is the person that's saying, okay, this aligns with where we're going, right? This is going to help us achieve what we want to achieve. So big picture, results focused. The operator, the more tactical buyer, says, worst case, this isn't going to get me fired, but best case, this is going to get me promoted, right? It's, that kind of a thing. So they are thinking about the organization, but you got to know that this person still has some upward movement in the organization, and something like this could really help. So I think they recognize that. And then the sort of, wet blanket folks that we just love in the organization is, this is safe. It's not risky. It's not breaking any rules. And, there's tons of upside to this, and really no sort of liability or legal downside or financial downside or anything else. So it's well worth it. So we get them to kind of sign off on it. Yeah.
Awesome. Well, Mark, I think this has been a great topic of conversation. I think we've broken this down effectively, different buying roles.
All right, John. Until next time.
Until next time.
Thanks for listening to Breaking BizDev. Subscribe on Spotify and Apple Podcasts, or listen to the show at breakingbizdev.com. This episode was produced by Red Cedar Marketing. If you think a business podcast is right for your company, visit redcedarmarketing.com to learn more.